Hi, welcome to More Christ. My name is Marcus. Today I'm joined with Father Benedict Kiely. Born in London and ordained in Canterbury in England in 1984, Father Ben has spent most of his priestly ministry in the United States. In the summer of 2014, he received a call to devote his entire priestly ministry to aid and advocacy for persecuted Christians, especially in the Middle East, founding a charity, Azure.org. Father Ben divides his time between the US, Britain, and the Middle East now, speaking, preaching, and writing, trying to focus attention on the plight of persecuted Christians around the world. He's visited war-torn Iraq on multiple occasions since 2015, and he's visited Syria and Lebanon, where Nazarian is now supporting several family businesses. Just to begin then, Father Ben, can you tell me a little bit about your background and some of the key events in your life that have helped to form you and your love for Christ and his church ultimately?
Well, thank you, Marcus, first for having me. Gorov mila mahagut. It's about it for my Irish, but it's better than some anyway. It's better than saying Cade Miller Fulcher all the time or Sláinte, but that's about what everybody knows. I mean, I look Irish. I've got an Irish name, but I'm English, born in England, and my parents had left the church. My father had left the church long ago from an Irish family, originally from in the Republic, but then the British Army. He was in the British Army, which of course then some of them moved to England. So he was the baby of five, and then but he'd long left the church. But I was brought up Catholic originally by my mother, but she left the church when I was 6, so I never made my first communion. I have a brother and sister, and we were all baptized. But I was lucky enough, and I say lucky or blessed rather, to go to an Anglican school. And I went through the sort of run-of-the-mill Anglican stuff, like getting confirmed and everything. But it touched me. It taught me how to pray. Anglicanism taught me how to pray beautifully because I was in a boarding school. We had to go to church, to chapel, as we called it, every single day. And around about 17, I thought, well, I'm not really an Anglican because I never go to church in the holidays, or I'm a Catholic. So I made my first communion and my confirmation at 17. And then, to cut a long story short, I tried my vocation, but I wasn't ready. I was too young. So I left, and I did my time, but I left and worked in the world, as we used to say. I don't know where anyone is except in the world, but I was in the world for a number of years, and did, of all things, my main career was public relations, which needs a lifetime of penance now for my sins. And anyway, as you said in your intro, parish priest in Vermont for 17 years, and around about 2014 was when I got the call. But in terms of my relationship with Christ, yes, it was the grace of that regular Anglican worship, which I think I never really deviated. I mean, it's far from perfect, obviously, but I never deviated from sort of mid-teen years onwards in terms of my faith, my belief, and I have to say my conservatism. I didn't fulfill the Churchillian, what's the aphorism or whatever it is, when he said you've got to be a liberal until you're 50 and then you're an idiot unless you're a conservative. I was either an idiot or a conservative the whole time, to a greater or lesser extent anyway.
And you touched upon there that call. What stirred this in you to help persecuted Christians in such a radical manner now in 2014?
Well, it's a very simple story. I mean, I heard on the news that Mosul had fallen, and Mosul, if our listeners don't realize, is Nineveh, which we hear about in the Bible a lot, where the prophet Jonah went. In fact, his tomb is in Mosul. ISIS blew it up. And I remember just one weekend I was preparing for Mass and thinking, this is just awful. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, because the Christians have been there that long, there's no Mass in Mosul, and what can we do? And I was wearing one of those rubber bracelets that everyone was wearing at the time, advertising something, and I just looked at it and I thought, well, we could wear the Arabic N, which I think you can see over my shoulder somewhere, the Nun, and whoops, my earpiece just fell out. That's highly professional. The Nun, which was marked by ISIS, and it's very ancient, in fact, it's not something new that ISIS invented. It's marking the unbeliever, the N being Nazarene, Nazarani, Christian, in other words. They marked the houses of Christians, saying basically a Christian lives here, convert, leave, or die. There was no choice. So I thought, we'll get those rubber bracelets made, and people can remember to pray. They can, a little bit of money will go forward. I was blessed again, not lucky. I think we really shouldn't use the word lucky, because in God's providence, as John Paul II said, there's no such thing as coincidence. One of my parishioners is a product person. He makes product for business. So he said, no problem, we'll make them. And then we made lapel pins again with the nun, and another parishioner just happened to be a UPS store owner, so he could ship stuff out. And it went incredibly well. And then I was blessed to be on EWTN, and then Fox News, in fact, came because they'd heard about it, and sales went through the roof. Anyway, to cut a long story short again, I knew I had to go. I mean, for start, to see that the money was actually doing what it said, because so many charities, massive amounts of money go to these places, and I mean, the expenses are 60%, and there's a huge amount of corruption. So I went in May of 15, and it was rough. I mean, there was thousands of refugees. ISIS was just down the road, and from then on, right up to now, 2023, as I said, I've been 9 times, just literally just come back from Iraq. So during those years, I perceived that call more and more, that I must devote my entire life to aid and advocacy for the persecuted. And my bishop agreed in 2016. He let me go. As bishops often are, they're very generous with one hand and not with the other hand. He said, yeah, you can go, but here's no money for the next 3 years. So I lived on my savings for 3 years, but that's not to cause tears in the audience. It's because I really believed that God would sort it out, and thanks be to God, he did. And so I was incardinated into the Ordinariate of Walsingham because of that. Hang on, the microphone's changed. Whoops. Your default. Can you hear me fine? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. It changed for some reason. So I found a home in 2018, and this is my full-time work as a priest: preaching, writing, speaking, advocating, and then the work of aid, which we do with our little charity.
Beautiful and wonderful ministry too. Thank you, Father Ben. And another element that's mentioned on your website is the Icon Project. Can you tell us a bit about that and why that's so close to your heart then?
That's really, I think, important, because, to quote Pope Francis, we're not an NGO. I mean, I don't think of us at all, our little charity, as an NGO in any way. We're very small, but we're Christians, we're believers, and our whole ministry is to help Christians. And if prayer isn't at the center of the ministry, there is that danger of being just a sort of an NGO or a charity. So I've always said, wherever I go, and it's always true, the first thing they've always asked me when I've been in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon, they always ask first for prayers. They don't ask for physical aid first. They always ask for prayers. And it's not pious nonsense, it's real. So prayer must be the center of all our ministry, and really the work of Christians in the West, because people are very despondent sometimes. They think, well, what can we do? What can we do? And you say, well, you can pray. Prayer is not a last resort. Prayer is a first resort. Prayer changes things. I mean, either we believe that as Christians or not. So I got the idea that we should put an icon of Our Lady into churches, but blessed by bishops, so it's got a real, as it were, backing, to pray for Mother of the Persecuted Church. So anyone can come and pray. You don't have to be from Iraq or Lebanon, etc. You could be from Nigeria or Indonesia or China or wherever. So first, to pray for the Christians, people in the diaspora, to pray for their families or whatever. But for us as well in the West, to pray, to do that duty. But also there's a third part, that we can be fortified, because we may not have our heads chopped off yet, but there's a growing persecution. So we put the first one into New York City, and then second one this last year in the end of the year in Massachusetts, and also in London, blessed by the bishops. And we're putting another one, please God, if all goes well, in Sweden, in Stockholm, in probably May or June. And the bishop, the cardinal, will bless it, because there are many, many Syrians and Iraqi Christians who've actually been received as immigrants into Sweden. So please God, we're going to have a number of these icons. If the bishop takes them, I mean, all he has to do is say yes, because we give it. There's no cost. So in a sense, why would you not say yes? But I've had bishops, believe it or not, I suppose you can believe it fairly easily. I've had bishops who've got no interest, which I find stunning. I mean, really stunning. I mean, we're going to put an icon in your church or your cathedral and give it to you to pray for persecuted Christians. Why would you say no? But sadly, some have. But anyway, it's a very beautiful project, and the one in London, I'm particularly pleased that we put it in fact, the night the Queen died, which was a little unfortunate, but you can't blame the Queen for that. But it was a beautiful occasion, and I think people, wherever I go, I mean, I was in New York, where was it? Back again in November, and you walk into the church, there's always candles lit. I was in London just the other day, there are candles lit. So people are praying, which is beautiful.
Yeah, amen. That's lovely. And I'm sure you've met many fascinating figures in your travels and things like that, Father. I'm just wondering, are there any who really stick out as persons who've been especially inspirational or influential for you then?
Well, there's one figure we call the General who sticks out. Maybe he's not inspirational, but he was one of my friends who went with me one time. A journalist described him as what did he describe him as? Benignly sinister, which is an interesting combination. As benignly sinister, we thought, well, he's probably did a bit torturing in his time, but he was a character. We had to go into Mosul, and so we needed him to get us into certainly in those days, right up to now actually. And the general helped us because he was a police general, so he could get us through the checkpoints and everything. So he was a character. But then I think the thing is, Marcus, they're just like us. I mean, there's nothing, as it were, special about them. They don't sort of glow. They don't have halos, but they're just men and women and children who, when push comes to shove, which is what's meant to happen for all of us, if you're told to deny Jesus Christ or die, in theory, we've got to say, kill me then. I mean, and one woman I did meet, an old lady, ISIS had come into the village. Her and her sister got somehow left behind. I suppose they were asleep, but the next day ISIS came into their house. I met her. She was quite a character, quite feisty. ISIS came in, the beard, long beard, not as short as yours, but a long beard, and said, and they saw a picture of Our Lady on the wall, and said, deny Jesus Christ. And the woman said, no, I followed him all my life. I mean, you might as well kill me now. They didn't know what to do. So the next day, a guy came in, senior ISIS guy with an even longer beard. That was a sort of sign that the beard's even longer. And he said the same thing. She said, no, kill me now. I followed him all my life. Kill me now. And then they expelled them. They didn't kill them. They expelled them, including taking the wedding rings off their feet. They said, if you find your wedding ring, we will kill you. So she hid hers in her shoe. So that's what it's all about. I mean, as I say, the funny thing was, at the end of the conversation, another journalist who was with me, a very gentle fellow, said, do you feel forgiveness now for these men? And she said, no, I think they should be dragged through the streets in a car attached to chains, which I kind of enjoyed. I suppose it's not very Christian, but it was real. Again, it was real. See, they're not perfect, but they're like us. So that's why, again, I think we have that connection, that it's so important to remember that this is a so-called civilized society, and yet this can happen. And I'm a little nervous that something very similar could happen at some point to us. I mean, not so far in the future.
Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about, but history does support you.
Well, I'm always impressed. If you talk about impressive people, one person I've met several times is the patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church, Patriarch Ignatius Ephraim. He lives in Damascus, but I've seen him in the West as well as in other countries. He's a very sweet, gentle man, big man, big beard, always smiling. But he said at a conference once, I remember, he said, there are 5 marks of the church. We always think of 4 marks, 1 holy, Catholic, and apostolic. He said there are 5 marks of the church, 1 holy, Catholic, apostolic, and persecuted, because the church has really been persecuted from the beginning. The Lord himself said, promised. It's not maybe, he promised we would be persecuted for his name's sake However, that doesn't mean you don't try and, because some people say to me, well, Jesus promised we'd be persecuted. He did, but that he didn't say don't help those who are being persecuted. So we have an obligation as part of our faith to help our brethren, because that's, again, without trying to be pious, we are either brothers and sisters in Christ. We say that, it sounds nice, brothers and sisters. We say it at Mass, brothers and sisters. But actually, that's the truth. We are brethren in Christ. Blood is actually not as important as the spirit. So you're my brother, you're Irish, I'm half Irish, but a Nigerian Christian who's suffering right now, who's being murdered right now is my brother or my sister, an Iraqi Christian. And we've got to have a sense of that Catholic. I think we've lost that Catholicity, especially in the West, especially in America, I have to say, that people can be rather insular. And I think the persecution coming into your, as it were, into your home, into your living room, and that desire to help is strengthening of the faith.
Silver lining indeed, Father. And what are some of the specific projects, I suppose, that you've been involved with through Nazarian, building upon what you've described already then?
Well, we're very small, as I said at the beginning. I always use the line "small is beautiful" because I think it is. One, it's far easier to follow the money because it's sad. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of corruption. There's a lot of money goes missing with very big people have good hearts, but in between, a lot of money disappears. And so we're very specific. It's aid and advocacy. Advocacy is me, literally. Nobody else. It's me speaking, doing what I'm doing right now, speaking, talking, writing as a priest. I visit as a priest, which is actually a help. I don't go in. Strangely, the collar is an entry point because you can speak the language. You could speak because of course they speak Aramaic still in parts of Iraq where I go, and in Syria as conversation, which is incredible. You hear the telephone go and they're speaking the language of Jesus, which is incredible. But there's also another language, which I call bishop language. And that is a special kind of language that they only speak when the bishop's around. And then they tell the truth when he disappears. So it kind of helps to be an ordinary priest. And people are genuinely, I think they're truthful. So that's the advocacy is me. And then the aid is, again, very specific. We don't build schools. We don't build orphanages. We mini microfinance small family businesses. And even if we're asked to do other things, we don't do it because I think it's very important, again, to be very focused. So effectively, I mean, I was just there. I can give you a couple of examples, a really beautiful example, in fact, for $5,000, which isn't much comparatively. It's less than £5,000. A farmer bought some land, and they've had 3 years of drought in Iraq. It's really bad. I mean, serious. The fields are brown. But you go to his farm, he's got about 8 hectares, I think, and you see green and brown because we paid for a well, for him to dig a well. It's very biblical. I mean, it was the most encouraging thing that I saw when I was there, that you see this beautiful green and then you see the brown next to it, which is sort of death and life. And my guide, who helps me all the time since 2015, he said to me, this man will not leave. He's got land now because this is the great danger, the emigration. It's just decimating the Christian community. So that's one thing. Another 2 beautiful little businesses, which are amazing, for $1,200. A woman in one of the towns, same town actually, but one next to a shrine and one in the town, bought what's called a kiosk, which is kind of like a shed, but they basically do fast food, burgers and things like that. Woman-run business. Same again by the monastery. It's keeping them going, keeping a family going. It's minimal, really. If you tell Americans you can do a startup for, we never usually give more than maximum of $10,000. That's incredible. I mean, that's nothing. But you keep a family in their country. I mean, this leads us into political discussion about migration and everything, because most people want to stay in their home. They want to stay in their home country. But critically, they need 2 things. They need security and they need a good economy. I can't do anything about the security, But if you give people a business or help people get a business, it's a major change in their life. They don't sit there receiving money to do nothing, because that dries up and they want to leave. Once they've got a business, they've got dignity. We don't make a big deal of it with people. We don't have our logo everywhere. In fact, we have our logo nowhere. So most people don't know what we're doing. But to me, I always think of it as my ticket to, please God, my ticket to heaven. When the Lord says, well, what did you do? I said, well, at least, Lord, I did try and do a few things for the Christians, to give them a cup of water, as we say from the scriptures, because it's little. But the guy said to me in Iraq the other day, a chap I was talking to, because I was a little despondent, and he said, in God's plan, that little things we do, they will count. So as I said, it's not big, but it's very encouraging to see all the businesses, even then they might struggle, the people, they're either growing or they're keeping going. So, and not one of them has left in the years I've been doing it in Iraq anyway, certainly. So that's very encouraging.
Absolutely, that's powerful. Thanks, Father. And then I suppose, in what ways can we in these parts help as individuals then, I suppose?
Well, first, as I said, that always is the first, is pray. It is not a weak thing to do. Prayer must inspire action, though. So but I think it's very important, because how many Christians are actually, we might pray at Mass once in a blue moon, the intercessions, we pray for our persecuted Christians, Lord, hear us, and that's it. So the Icon Project is one thing, supporting that. This is a place of prayer. If any Irish bishop is listening, yeah, we'll put an icon in your cathedral, no problem. There's one in London, as I said, two in the US so far, but that's specific. So personal daily prayer. I mean, I ask people when I speak at parishes or conferences, I say, can you say one Hail Mary a day for the persecuted? I mean, that's not hard, is it? And people tell me, I've seen them later, another year later, we're still praying our Hail Mary. Good, thank God. That's important. So personal daily prayer is the first. And then action, obviously helping charities, not just my charity, but other charities, but also advocacy from Christians. I mean, everyone who's a voter has certain rights. Speak to I just saw in America, there's a big conference going on right at the moment, and they've introduced a resolution to help Nigeria, because Nigeria was taken off the area of, I can't remember the term, but something like area of special interest for some unknown reason, because the persecution is intense in Nigeria. I mean, someone said to me the other day that I believe 12 Christians a day are being murdered in Nigeria. It's just incredible. And it's barely on our news screens. It's stunning. And I mean, Nigerians have said to me, a young Nigerian doctor I know, she said to me, she's in America, she said, well, they have all these marches for Black Lives Matter, but they don't seem to be too concerned about our Black lives and Christian lives in Nigeria. So advocacy, speak to your senator, your MP, your member of the Doyle, whoever they are, senator, representative, say, what's going on? What are you doing to trade? I mean, trade is very powerful. You tell a country, yeah, we're not going to trade with you if you continue to allow this persecution. That's where the money counts. We don't seem to say that even with China, do we? I mean, look at the amount of trade we have with China. So there's actually a lot Christians can do. We're not weak.
No, absolutely. And I think you have covered. My next question was going to be about the macro level and what we can do. I think you did cover that in part. Would you like to say anything more about that, especially, I suppose, in light of the stories not being covered by the secularist media and our challenges, kind of minorities in a kind of dominant secularist state like Britain, for example, and Ireland?
Well, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, we're very similar now. Who'd have thought it? But I mean, I have to. Sorry to say it, but I was at a conference in August in Italy, and a Nigerian bishop was there. His diocese, you may remember, on Pentecost Sunday in his diocese, at Mass on Sunday, 40 plus Christians, men, women, and children were martyred, were shot, murdered. He was there within an hour. He said it was a bloody scene, just awful. And you might remember that your President Higgins of Ireland, who's a little fella, although I was told off, chap told me at Mass a couple of months ago, he said, "You're not too tall yourself." I said, "Well, yeah, okay, fair enough." But this little fella said something crass and ignorant. He partially blamed this martyrdom on climate change. And Bishop Jude of the diocese was a very gentle man, very, very sweet man, strong man. He said, 40 of my people were not murdered at Mass because of climate change. And this is a narrative. Even the British government has this narrative that, oh, it's because of climate change, the herdsmen are moving and pushing people out. That may be part of the picture. But why are they killing Christians at Mass, burning churches, burning villages? The word genocide is being used. And if you're trying to wipe out populations, that really is a genocide. So the macro level is, back to what I said a bit, is speaking to parliamentary representatives of whatever kind and saying, this is not acceptable. And the media, well, that's kind of almost a hopeless cause, because I was told by a senior media figure that, what was the phrase he said? Oh, this is a ratings killer. I mean, that's really, talk about cynical and depressing, but it's not either. Again, it's how you present the story. I think they think it's a ratings killer because of all that I said before, that people feel hopeless and we don't want to hear about any more of this persecution. We can't do anything. Well, I think I've just said you can do something. Mm-hmm. So we mustn't let ourselves be despondent. I mean, the quote I always use in talks, again, is very, very powerful. If you remember from the Acts of the Apostles, Peter is imprisoned, and we're told, it's a beautiful line in the Acts of the Apostles, the church prayed constantly for him, or consistently. So, and what happened? His angel came and took him out of the prison cell. So prayer changes things. Prayer, consistent, constant prayer for the persecuted, will change things. This is my complaint with the ecclesial authorities so often, as I said about bishops not taking the icon. They're not bothered. I mean, why can't a bishop say, once a month we're going to have a gathering in our cathedral and we're just going to pray for an hour for the persecuted church? It'd be something, wouldn't it? But name me a bishop who does it. I mean, there might be one or two, but the vast majority are not. One bishop could say, I'm going to lead the rosary once a month, 15 minutes of prayer for the persecuted, but it doesn't happen. So that can be, I think they will also have to answer for that, why they're not. Jesus will say why, because remember, which again, I'm basically using all my lines for all my talks in this interview, so they'll all say we heard that before. St. Paul, Saul, was on his way to Damascus to persecute the church. And Jesus's words are so powerful. He said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? The persecuted church is Jesus. It is Jesus being persecuted. And if we don't care, if we say, oh no, we're actually going to have an evening on climate change instead, great, all for it to a certain extent. But how about an evening about the persecuted church? Because that's Jesus himself being persecuted in his brethren. So, I'm obviously a little passionate about it, but if one isn't passionate about it, what can you do?
No, we're grateful for you. Thank you, Father Ben. And aside from some more points, maybe in the conference that we're going to have with Calvin and Rod about your wonderful work with Azure in the Middle East, and that's where I want to touch upon this kind of conservative element to your character, and it's more nuanced forms, I suppose, because whenever people hear conservative, they automatically just think of the Tory party, for example, in Britain, and it's quite small-minded. But in the past, you've spoken at National Conservative Conference, which has got some wonderful people involved in it, including the Yoram Hazony, the wonderful Israeli guy. And I wanted to ask, how did that come about, and how was that event then?
Well, I was trying to think today how it came about, because I was sort of, how did that come about? But yeah, I mean, you've raised Yoram Hazony, who's just written a very detailed and quite heavy book about conservatism. It's quite a Jewish influenced group, the National Conservatives, which is also gives the lie to this nonsense about that it's alt-right or it's anti-Semitic, or it's all from the left saying this sort of stuff. It's basically about, people say, well, what is National Conservatism? It's what you used to call conservatism in the old days, nothing to do with the Conservative Party. It's culture, it's national identity. It's funny, you know, I say I'm an Englishman with an Irish name, but there's no problem being an Irish nationalist. There's no problem being a Welsh nationalist. There's no problem being a Scottish nationalist. It's funny that you can't be an English nationalist because you're a fascist. I know they were associated perhaps in the old certain days with 70s and 80s with extreme right-wing parties in England, but English nationalism is just the same as Irish nationalism. It's a love of your own culture, your heritage, the beautiful things. I'm an ordinariate priest, as you know, and one of the things we were tasked with is to remind English people of their heritage pre-Reformation. I mean, we've got some of the most incredible saints, Anglo-Saxon saints, all the way through the Norman Conquest and on, who are sort of almost forgotten, or they're in the background. They're those people with funny names. And so how did I get really involved? I think I was asked by my friends who are editors of the European Conservative magazine if I would. Actually, the first time was in Brussels, yeah. So they just wanted me to speak about everything I've just been talking to you about the persecuted. And but then I was asked again in September, October to go to Miami and speak more specifically, because there are a lot of Protestants involved. It's very Jewish, as I said, and it's quite Protestant, but the Catholic presence was not so strong. So I think Yoram in particular wanted, I mean, my talk was basically, is it possible to be a Catholic and a National Conservative? Because various people say, oh, no, you can't. It's because you're alt-right, et cetera, et cetera. And my contention was, yes, I mean, why not? I did make the clear point, and I would make it again. I am not a member of any party. I'm not a Conservative in England, a member of the Conservative Party, partly because I think this will come up in our discussion, I would think. They're not conservative. I mean, there's absolutely nothing conservative about the British Conservative Party at all. I can't vote for them. I mean, literally, I've got to the point now where I cannot vote. I don't know who I'll vote for. But I think it's important as a priest. I don't think one should be advertising membership of any party. I mean, priests get into trouble if they're seen to be, as it were, partisan. My point was, just as someone can be a socialist, I was friends, in fact, very good friends, he's dead now, with the former leader of the Christian Socialist group in the Labour Party. He was a priest. He left the priesthood, sadly. But I think you can be a socialist and be a Christian. I think that's unwise, but you can do it. So why can't you be a conservative, not a necessarily Conservative Party member, but a conservative? So that was my contention, and I think it's a valid point to make.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing, Father Ben. And what are some of the virtues within the conservative movement in that broader context that you think are worthwhile, especially in the English-speaking world, I suppose?
Well, this is where the challenge is. I mean, you go to think of the French. I mean, everything French is the best in the world, according to the French. And I mean, no one really, we could joke about them, but they love their culture. They love their food. They love their heritage. Even if they're very left wing, they're French. They know they're French, and you can be any color and be French. I mean, it's about your culture. It's an enjoyment of your culture. Just because you celebrate your own heritage and culture. I mean, I'm looking over your shoulder and I see a book it says Irish. It's probably a dictionary, I presume. Yeah. You're obviously proud of being an Irishman, and God bless you. Doesn't mean you're going to kill me. I mean, I'm half Irish, so you probably let me off. But it's just madness. It's obviously it's a development from the Second World War, where it appeared that nationalism, grotesque nationalism. I mean, I quoted Roger Scruton, who's a kind of a guru for many people, that it's not my country right or wrong. I also quoted John Paul, who was very proud of his Polish heritage, that it's never my country right or wrong. And Chesterton as well, who said a true patriot is critical of his culture. I'm trying to think of his exact words, but he said something like, someone who just thinks their culture is perfect is a courtier, just agreeing with everybody. So there's a critical element to it, but I think it's about a righteous celebration of one's own heritage and culture. God, I mean, we could say it was the Tower of Babel that caused the division, but I'm sure God wants us to be also a little bit different. I mean, it's a bit annoying to try and learn Hungarian or something, but it would be rather dull if we were really all the same, if we didn't have those different things. I know it's a bit simplistic to say, but it doesn't mean we have to go to war with each other because we have a love of our culture and our heritage. And there's so much else. I mean, it's deep stuff with politics, but conserving, I mean, Scruton said again, I think that was a weak definition of conservatism, but a lot of things were better a few years ago. And think of people will attack me for it, but you look at architecture, you look at so many different things, and it was actually better. It was more, I hate to use the word, but I would say civilized. Manners, all the things. There's so many things, and so I think there's certainly something natural. That's probably what I would conclude with saying. There's certainly something natural with a Catholic being a conservative, not a member of a conservative party, but a natural conservative.
Brilliant. Thanks, Father Ben. And what then, I suppose, in line with what you said about the Conservative Party, so you can touch upon them again, or again, that broader movement of conservatives in the English speaking world, what are some of the limitations and maybe missteps that you think that they're making from a Christian perspective, if that makes sense?
How long have you got? No, I mean, it's just hopeless. There's nothing I mean, there used to be economic conservatives, which I don't think, again, I mean, a quote I have been quoted from my speech in October was, if you're not a social conservative, you're not a conservative. And I really believe that. I mean, marriage, I know it's controversial, but it was the Conservative Party of England and Wales, of Great Britain, Conservative and Unionist Party, to give it its full title, that introduced the gay marriage law. They introduced the pill for abortion during lockdown. There's just and those are two things. But yeah, even in economics, I mean, the Conservative Party, to deal with COVID, has spent more than I think any party in history. It's just hopeless. That I just don't think there are individual MPs who are still old-fashioned Tories, but the party as such. That's why I said I don't think I can vote for it. I would want to vote for it, but I can't. How can you vote for a party that really doesn't represent you? But I think in Britain, it's hard to talk about Britain because I don't know Scotland well. I don't know Wales. I don't know Northern Ireland. I mean, I've visited them all, but I lived for a while in Wales. But I tend to speak of England. Is a very secular society now. I mean, really secular, hostile even to Orthodox religion, not certain Orthodox religions, but Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, there seems to be a real hostility towards. And that's why I talk about persecution, because it's not at the level necessarily of violence, although we've had the just in the last 6 weeks or so the 2 cases already of people being arrested for praying, silent praying outside abortion facilities. I mean, I was talking to an American yesterday who was just gobsmacked, as they say, as you say, we say. You can be arrested for silent prayer in England in 2023, and people say, "Oh, that's nonsense." No, that's the law. I mean, that's shocking. It's stunning, and people need to wake up, because Baroness Fox, Lady Fox, I saw in the Commons in the House of Lords yesterday, who's, I don't know, she's a believer. She's certainly not a Catholic, and she's I believe she was a Marxist, but was speaking up against this because she said, yeah, that's prayer, but what about other speech? I mean, it's sort of the canary in the coal mine thing again, that soon you won't be allowed to protest about something. Soon you won't be allowed to do this. It's this slow, not so slow encroaching of free speech, which is again, I think a conservative will let someone speak, even if you're 100% against what they're saying, because I actually believe, I'm sure I'll be challenged, but I believe we are open to debate, whereas the left seems to be increasingly totalitarian, I believe.
And I suppose actually on that point, Father, are there any things that modern progressives or the left wing types are actually doing right today? And I suppose that can either be in terms of content or even maybe clever strategies that we should be adopting in order to actually
Well,
make a
well,
difference.
I don't want to get into the U.S. elections, but they obviously did something right at the last election. The Conservatives or the Republicans seem to make a lot of mistakes, but I think we always must look for points of unity. And as I said, I quoted Claire Fox. I mean, she's not someone who's part of our movement. She's of the left, but we have common ground. And I think that's important to find where people are defending religious freedom or freedom in general. We have common ground. We have common ground with Muslims on family issues, many family issues. I mean, they were the links between the Vatican worked with Muslim countries and the UN to try to preserve families. These are common areas of common ground. So I think we should always encourage any areas of those kind of links or those commonalities. And I think the left does, obviously, if it's pure, as it were, the old-fashioned, more of the old-fashioned left, necessarily not the sort of identity politics stuff, but talking of human needs and the poor and the needy and care for the needy. I mean, these are Christian virtues. I think that's where Christian socialists appear, because of that desire to care for the poor and the needy. And it's a righteous, perhaps, challenge or criticism, some conservatism, especially what we could call the neocons, that the sort of just, it's all about economics and it's all about the market. I think the interesting development, which we don't, or it's very small in this country, is what's happening in America at the moment with the conservative movement, the election of people like J.D. Vance, and who are talking more about, I know people laugh with that word, compassionate conservatism, but it's true that there's a sense of a deeper, you could call it paleo-conservatism. It's not neocons and neoconservatism, because that has failed. That was back to my work, it was because of the Hawks in 2003 that the Christian world in the Middle East has been uprooted and almost destroyed. And Pope John Paul warned, and most people ignored him. In fact, I was fairly supportive. I didn't know what I was talking about, really. And it's true. Everything he said the church in Iraq will be destroyed, and he's right. So, as I say, we're areas of commonality, areas of agreement, areas of cooperation are good. But true dialogue is about sticking to your own principles. It's not about a fudge. We must be real believers in what, especially in terms of religious dialogue, to have an effective. I mean, we might have to say to one another, well, we can't find common ground then on this, but we can do this. So, as I said, with Muslims, I mean, there isn't really, truthfully, deep theological dialogue possible. And you talk to a Muslim and they will tell you that, if they're telling the truth, and a Christian will tell you that. There isn't theological dialogue. I mean, Muslims believe that we believe in three gods. They believe Jesus is not the Son of God. I mean, there isn't much area of agreement there, but they believe in the family and other things like that. So we can work together.
Bless you in your work. Thank you so much for your time, Father.
Thank you, Marcus.
I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. I'm on my way. I'm going there. I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. I'm on my way. I'm going there. I'm going